In the early 1970s, a group of young men nicknamed the Earl's Court Hippies started on a fantastic journey of disruption. Headed by Richard Branson and guided by a sense that things could be done differently, the music business was set to be changed for good. The 16-year-old Richard started Student Magazine and then a young people's advisory service from a private house he was renting in London's Albion Street. Breaking the rules was already in his DNA.
We were working out of a street just down the road, and we weren't really meant to be working out of it. So the church commissioners that owned the house came in one day, and we'd hidden all the telephones and everything in the cupboard, and we were pretending that
your parents lived there.
Right, and
the phone started ringing in the cupboard.
Yeah.
So that's how we were
So
called.
the local vicar said, "I've got a crypt in my church, why don't you move in there?"
It was extremely generous, obviously, of Reverend Cuthbert Scott. Moving to the crypt was highly unsatisfactory. Had people been paid, there would have been a strike. The ceilings were extremely low, there was no natural light. You know, the tombs served as desks.
We're always nervous, as you can see, that the grave would cave in on us.
After noticing the students working on the magazine would rather buy the latest hot record than a hot meal, he realised the time was right for a discounted mail-order record service. So he put an advert in the back of Student Magazine, and the Virgin brand was born.
We packed up the mail-order records from here. It was busy, thriving atmosphere.
The first thing I did when I started there in the early '71 is to sort of work out ways of importing records, and then we started doing importing records that were going to come out in England, but where there was a time lag. So we could advertise the new Joni Mitchell album or the new Mothers of Invention album and sell hundreds of copies at import prices.
The fledgling company was already making waves in the music business, and orders came in thick and fast.
Until there was a 6-week postal strike.
That basically meant no money was coming in.
We couldn't send any records out, so the whole place was just piling up and then grinding to a halt.
So Richard said we have to find a shop, like within a week. And we did. We found this shop above a shoe shop in Oxford Street, which is a fantastic location, of course, but everybody had to go through this shoe shop up to our store, and we made it really different from anything else that had existed. We had like waterbeds, but people used to put their cigarettes out on them. We had headphones. In the old days you had to listen to music in a booth. We had discounts, we had bootlegs. We were the only people selling like Led Zeppelin live at Bath. There were queues on the first day down Oxford Street in a fabulously painted building. It really rescued us.
The idea was to run the mail order as a kind of flagship loss leader, because it was hard to make money discounting the way we were. As far as I know, we never made any money in retail in the early years at all.
Selling records the Virgin way spread to Notting Hill Gate and then Liverpool, but not all rules in the music business were made to be broken.
This was our second shop, but it was also the sort of head office which Nick ran from upstairs with Ken Berry.
This was kind of the engine room of the Virgin shops. The morning I opened Bowl Street was also the morning you were arrested, and I was arrested up in Liverpool, but you were properly arrested and thrown in jail. We had been able to pass on certain savings from the taxman to the customer.
They fined us 3 times what we'd saved. So over the next couple of years, we expanded to something like 20 or 30 record shops, and we just used the turnover to pay off the fine.
With Virgin's influence spreading rapidly across the country, Richard moved on to thinking about the creation of the music itself, and about how musicians had to record in the production line environment of expensive London studios. There had to be another way.
We were driving back from Wales, where we'd seen a beautiful picture of this fairy tale castle, and we thought this would be the most beautiful recording studio, and we would drive to Wales, we'd see it, and on the way back I think I had Country Life on my lap and suddenly saw this picture of the manor, only about 50 miles from here, and then thought, let's pop in on the way back. That's when we climbed over the wall and had a look.
Yeah.
Well, let's climb over the wall. Come on. You name it, they had been here over the years. Everybody from Frank Zappa to Captain Beefheart to Paul McCartney to Rolling Stones, Cat Stevens. We had so many parties over the years on this lawn, so many artists recorded here.
We went there for a weekend party. Richard said, "We're thinking of buying this place." I thought, "What? Whose is it? I mean, you've got a party here and you don't even own it." It was wonderfully chaotic.
Beautiful place, yeah. But it was more the atmosphere there, you know, with all the people. There was something new coming.
But little did they know that something new would come from an introverted session musician named Mike Oldfield.
Richard had sent a band down, Arthur Lewis, was it? There was a
that's
band
right.
called Arthur
Yeah.
Lewis. And Michael was playing session guitar player for them. I'd never met him, he was just one of the hippies in the band. He came and poked his nose right here and said, "Listen to this." And I listened to it, so maybe a day or two later he kept pestering me, and it was just absolutely beautiful. And Richard listened to it and he loved it, but there was no infrastructure of record label yet.
And then when I left, they liked the demos, they promised to get back to me. So I waited and I waited and I waited and waited.
And we just thought, well, maybe we should try to, start a record company, literally just to put out Tubular Bells.
I remember asking if you'd like to be our first artist.
Oh, that was a dream come true when he rang me up. Couldn't believe it.
Making the record, once we decided to do it and Michael had focused, was relatively easy. But this poor bugger had the worst job in the world because he had to sell it. It wasn't like any other music that was playing at that time. I think it wasn't until John Peel played it all the way through that I think that made an enormous difference.
And when he played the entire album, used his whole show, I remember I was sitting in the kitchen of the Manor, and just this little radio, and I couldn't believe it. If I hadn't have actually given him the demo, I don't think any of this had happened.
It was very much the birth of Virgin.
It wasn't until we started the record label that Virgin became a bit more financially stable because the record company made money.
Tubular Bells became the biggest selling album of 1973, overturning conventions of selling albums and firmly establishing Virgin as the new label on the block. Over the next few years, Virgin expanded. Richard was now living on his houseboat Duende, and the offices moved to Vernon Yard just off Portobello Road. But they struggled to repeat the success of their first signing until 1977.
I was up there, Ken was there, Nick was there, John Barnum was over there, Steve Lewis was there.
I actually heard one of the Pistols records for the first time in Henneke's there.
I rang up the chairman of EMI, and in those days he wouldn't talk to me personally. And I left a message saying if he wanted to get rid of his embarrassment, could he give me a ring? And I got a fairly curt message back saying thank you very much, but we're quite happy with the Sex Pistols. The next morning, after they'd appeared on the Bill Grundy show the night before, I was woken up at my home, and it was the chairman personally on the phone. And he said, if you want them, you can have them. We rang into problems with the law over the name Bollocks.
It was deemed illegal to use the word bollocks in a public place under the 1824 Vagrancy Act, and the police were going to take us to court for all sorts of things. So we did a poster in the window to reassure our customers that we knew right from wrong. The heading of the poster was the Metropolitan Police Authority, then it said the 1824 Vagrancy Act, and on these grounds we couldn't advertise, never mind the bollocks. And underneath this it said, but don't worry, we know best. And then it was signed the Metropolitan Police. And we stuck this in the window, and a lot of people, not excluding the Metropolitan Police, got really cross, which we were delighted about.
So I rang up a linguistics expert at Nottingham University, and the professor there said that the police were talking a lot of bollocks, and that actually the word bollocks was a nickname given to priests in the 18th century, and that he would be happy to come to court. And he happened to be a priest himself, and so would I mind if he wore his dog collar? And of course was delighted, and he turned up at court with his dog collar on, and the judge reluctantly found us not guilty.
Further tussles with the police as God Save the Queen was launched cemented Virgin's reputation as creative disruptors. This culture of tearing up the rule book had spread throughout the company.
Richard always had a fantastic grasp of what delegation meant. I might be dealing with 6 bands, we were spending 20,000 a band. In my office, I'd design the ads, write the copy, put the artwork together, wrap everything up in brown paper and send it off to the newspapers, and nobody but me knew what was in the ads. And nobody would until a week after, when we'd open all the newspapers and the music press and see what I'd done.
I spent a lot of time in that room up there, which was the headquarters of the accounts Gestapo that used to be grilling me about my expenses. We were supposed to get all sorts of authorisations before doing things, but Richard often used to set me off on something that we didn't know how it was going to work out. We're always trying to do something that hadn't been done before.
The best Sansa story I remember, and tell me if it's true, was that you wanted a particular sound in the recording studio. They went and had a big curry we mic'd up the
Oh, yeah.
loo,
We
mic'd
mic'd
up the toilet
in the toilet
in order
outside.
to get this particular sound.
It wasn't used in the end, but it was a song called The Strain. The words
We
were...
recorded it all in the loo.
Yeah. Hey, hey, human, you got to do the strain. You got to grip the seat. You got to pull the chain.
Post-punk, Richard successfully launches Virgin in the French market with Julian Clerc and Telephone, but fails to crack the USA, costing the company £900,000. By 1980, the label is struggling financially.
1980 was a year of, frankly, retrenchment. Singles didn't turn into albums. It was a difficult time. But what was so terribly exciting was signing Phil Collins in 1980. There was discussion, argument within the organisation. Could we afford to pay the advance for that small territory? And indeed, it turned out to be an absolutely excellent A&R acquisition of the Human League. 2 albums in. Should we carry on with them? Should we not? We carried on with the third album, and that third album became their greatest album, Dare, and that enormous hit with Don't You Want Me.
We moved into this building in the 80s, a much bigger building than we were used to. It was the heyday of the record company.
I was deputy managing director when Culture Club was signed to the company, and we'd released 2 singles, neither of which had met with any success.
And the third single chosen, I think somebody in the garage here at Vernon Yard said, why don't you, there's one song which is going mad in the clubs.
Do you really want to hurt me?
And boy, that song did not hurt us at all. That lifted Culture Club into the stratosphere of super artists.
The record went on to be number 1, I think, in 27 countries and changed, obviously, their fortunes and those of Virgin Records at the time.
Great A&R, great image of the brand, and great artists.
With the record company back on track, Richard decides to take the Virgin brand into new areas, infamously taking on the big boys with Virgin Atlantic.
1984, we had a very successful record company, nearly bankrupted it by actually putting out George Orwell's film 1984, which went about 3 times over budget. And also that same year we launched Virgin Atlantic, the airline. So we're certainly stretching ourselves a bit thin, but fortunately the record company was just on top of the world at the time.
Virgin Records' success continues throughout the 80s with artists such as UB40 and Peter Gabriel, and had become the label of choice of emerging talent. And they finally cracked the American market with both Paula Abdul and Steve Winwood at the top of the US charts.
I think we had a tremendous group of musicians. We were proud of the fact that no musician ever left the record label, and that's why Virgin grew into the most successful independent record label in the world.
By the early 90s, it was clear just how far this once tiny independent label had come when Virgin signed Janet Jackson for a record-breaking $25 million fee. After many attempts over the years, Richard had finally secured the Rolling Stones, and the brand was truly global, fronted by the distinctive megastores. But elsewhere, Virgin Atlantic was in crisis.
It's always sad having to sell anything, and a company is no different than almost anything else, in that it's a group of people. We were forced to sell the record company just after we'd signed the Rolling Stones and Janet Jackson, and we had to sell because British Airways were waging a dirty tricks campaign to put Virgin Atlantic out of business, and we really needed the financial muscle to fight back.
Now part of EMI, Virgin Records signed pioneering dance music artists such as the Chemical Brothers, Massive Attack and Daft Punk. They started a girl power revolution with the Spice Girls and continued to build their impressive roster in America. In the new musical landscape of the 21st century, the label's going back to the ideals of those Earl's Court hippies. Signing iconic acts like David Guetta, Laura Marling, Professor Green, Emily Sandé and Jake Bugg, Virgin EMI is showing it's serious about shaking things up for a long time to come.
It was great to look back over the 40 years and see how many things were completely disruptive. Tubular Bells, Boy George on Top of the Pops, John Lydon, and our mission running Virgin now is just to continue causing as much mayhem as possible. We're looking to continue the legacy of Richard in the best possible tradition.